I'd like to call the Danville City Commission special call meeting to order. Today is Thursday, April the 10th, and the time is 5 after 9, and I want to call this meeting to order and thank staff for all the preparations that have been done to get us to this point today in our budget process. So the first item on our agenda is have an airport board agency presentation by Mr. Rob Cowell. Mr. Cowell?
Just leave.
Yeah, hit the person closest to you, Rick.
When it goes, green is good. All right, green is good. Thank you all, and I appreciate you moving me to today because I'm unavailable on the 17th, and thanks for doing that. I want to start with the fun stuff, and then we'll get to the nuts and bolts. This year, last year we had a wonderful balloon event that ended up attracting, 3,000 to 4,000 people, and it was put together on a short notice, and to turn out so well, we were really hoping to do it again this year, but Jake Bell, that chaired that initiative last year and did so well with it, he's actually going to be out of town this year, possibly while the festival's going on, and so was unable to take on the challenge of chairing that group, and so I had shared that with folks around the community, and the good news is we've had a group gather together that are willing to help put it on, and so August 24th, mark your calendar, we have the balloons in order, and we have the parking folks in order, which are two really big hurdles. And so we're real excited to see that we're going to be able to do that. And
What was the date again? I'm sorry.
August the 24th. It's a Sunday. There is no rain date. We're planning on it working. Cross your fingers, no hurricanes passing through. Yeah. But the group, we met a couple of weeks ago. Candace was there with the CVB, Jeff with the chamber, Melanie was here with the city, attended, and Brittany Kaufman and Brianna Feistrecher with the Junction City Matters group that are trying to raise funds for a park in Junction City, have actually volunteered to lead this effort. And so we had a great meeting, and they are on board, and I'm hoping you guys will keep in the back of your minds that as it approaches, you all were very kind to offer us Herbie Kirby's last year and traffic control with the officers, and we appreciate that, and then possibly some potties. I think you all included those last year, and so we'll be following up with what we're thinking we need, and we hope everybody's on board.
So you're saying the Herbie Kirby's weren't the potties too? I'm embarrassed now.
Oh, you're talking, maybe we can find that multi-use receptacle.
I'm going to be quiet now. Go right ahead, sir.
Probably shouldn't elaborate on that, should we? Yeah. And so, but at any rate, we're excited to have that happen, and I just wanted to get that out of the way while everybody was thinking about it, and how excited we are to have a group together that's willing to come forward and lead, but it will be a community effort, and we think it should be a tremendous event. One of the issues we've had over the years is just getting traffic in and out. And if the airport board at our meeting next week approves, I've already got an entrance permit ready to submit, but on the old US 127, the airport has about 12 acres that as you drive down that section, you see just a grassy field. And we were going to there's a place where we can just put a pair of lockable gates, and that's really close to the, the main Shelby City, Junction City, Main Street. And so we think bringing traffic in that way, in addition to the other, that we should make it a much easier event for people to get in and out. And so, so we're hoping it'll be bigger and better this year. So moving on to our budget request. As Christian and David put it together, the first three items that they had were city support for the local match on 3 projects. And one is finishing up our entrance road, which if you haven't been out there, you should go take a peek. It's not done, but the pavement's in and a lot of the planting has been done. And I think we should find that to be a really helpful addition. And we appreciate you all going to the bat with the elected officials to get that earmarked for us. And so, and Mayor Emeritus Paris, I know, was involved in that also. And so I've got you right here to say thank you. That's good. Yeah, and so we've got those funds, matching funds that we're asking for. We're working on our what's called Phase 2 of our master plan, and which is the FAA fund portion is shown here, and we're asking for the local matching portion to be shared with the county. And then the third component is we're running out of space in our corporate hangars, and so we had a letting earlier this week, and the good news is it came in right on the engineer's estimate, but we're going to be putting up another hangar. And the federal fund portion that's being used for that is we're asking for the matching funds, and as we typically do. And so moving on from there, in order with this new entrance road, we're trying to tie all of our facilities so that you can access them from this new entrance road. And so we've had a neighbor agree to sell us an acre of property so that we can connect those drives, and so we have asked for $50,000 to go toward the purchase of that property, and we're asking the county for the other $50,000. The last 2 items that are on the list are, you all have been very kind and offered us funds so that we can pay for our airport insurance policy, and we're asking for those again. And then we put a number in where Patty Powell was kind enough to donate a crew car a few years ago. It's getting some age on it, and what we're really running into is we've got a lot of these corporate folks that are coming in, and there's 5 and 6 people, and we're really hoping to lease something that has 3 rows of seats so that they can use those to go to their meetings and get back to their airplane and go home, and hoping to lease a vehicle, and so that finishes our budget request that was documented. I would like to add that in the previous 2 years, the city has funded $50,000 each year toward our business plan, which we've started. It'll be going on for the next year, and we appreciate those funds. It's actually a $151,000 contract, and so we're not asking for those funds. However, if in your debate you're looking at these items and you want to call something one or the other, I just know that there's another $51,000 that we're not asking for today, and so we would surely appreciate you considering the sum anyway, because that's what we feel we need to succeed and stay on top financially. And then I will add the business plan that you all have been helping us fund is being performed by an engineering firm of Kimley and Horn, and I've been real impressed with what they've done so far, and look forward to them, moving on with that contract. But I was at a meeting the other day, a statewide meeting, and Brad Schwant with the Kentucky Department of Aviation announced that they have chosen Kimley Horn to do a statewide, what they call a system plan, where they'll be looking at our airports and how we price our hangars, and what are the different airports doing in order to charge fair and reasonable rates. Typically, they're below fair and reasonable. I'm proud to say that several years ago, that your airport board instituted a cost of living index increase each year, and that's been each year as the cost of living has gone up, that we have increased our rates. So I think there's been a concern from the general community around the state and the country, that the private aircraft owners aren't funding enough of the hangars themselves, and I think we address that, and we look forward to seeing what Kimley Horn comes up with, because if they'll either use it as a model, or they may come up with their own that we can adopt, but that's what we do to keep the prices current, and so that we are, as Stuart would always say, trying to take your dollar and turn it into two and use it diligently. So, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any questions or comments from the commission?
May I add two more little items?
Yes, sir.
Housekeeping? Oh, I'm sorry. One is, there's a fly-in this Saturday at 11 a.m. There'll be food trucks out there, and the public is welcome. We know people that have children that are interested in aviation, and they want to expose them to airplanes. We'll be out there. And then in a month, I don't recall the date, but we're planning our Young Eagles program, where we take people up for an airplane ride at no charge. So keep an eye on Facebook, and would encourage you all to attend and enjoy the festivities. Hey, sorry about that. Thank
That's all right.
No?
That's why we're here. Thank you.
All I was gonna say was, in all the years I've been here, I never questioned whether or not they are making good use of the money that we allocate them, and that continues.
Okay. I guess that's a positive comment, right?
That is a positive comment, sir. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other comments or questions? Well, I like the way you've broken down the $100,000 request and tells us specifically what all the money is going to be used for. 3 very specific items, so that's good. Mr. Coffey, Ms. Compton, you all have any comments or questions for Mr. Cowell?
I do not, no, sir.
Okay, good. All right. You okay? Wow. Thank you, sir. That doesn't happen too often. Oh, that's okay. Just, you promised to take us on vacation with you, so that's why we agreed to it.
Well, I'm leaving in about an hour and a half. You're welcome to go with me. I've got a 3-page list in my notes for my daughter, because she's expecting a boy in about a month.
Oh, yeah,
A list of shelves and
yeah,
blackout window stuff and
yeah.
things to put up that I could use an extra hand.
Set of hands, there you go. That's right. Well,
Thank you all.
safe travels, man. You can tell he's excited about that grandbaby, right? Okay, next on our list is, oh my Lord, a department presentation by the Danville Police Department. You don't even look like Chief Gray. What do you say? Yeah, that's right. He got more hair than Chief Gray's got, right?
Yeah, yeah. I was thinking about letting it grow out a little longer, but better not. All right, what do y'all want to talk about? You tell me. All right, Chief Gray, I'll piggyback off of, his first presentation. I think for us this year, we'll kind of go through just a quick glance at last year's, just, for context about where we're at and what we're seeing as far as call-wise, and then talk about some of our immediate needs that we're looking at this year. Can I do the slides? we'll get to that in a minute. I've got some other notes that we don't have on the slides that it's been pretty busy. Chief Gray's out. He's sent me some things. But, you know, what we're looking at this year more than anything, and you'll see some of these call trends that we'll go over briefly, is we are continuing to see an increase in services. But we believe that if we can sustain our staffing levels, right now we're allotted 39 full-time officers. If we can sustain that we could go this year without asking for an additional officer to go up to 40 or 41 staffing. We want to concentrate now on our internal structure, and getting that fixed is our main goal and our main priority. And that does not have us increasing our numbers at this point. Now, I say that, and this will probably be, it would be a safe bet to say that this is the last year you'll hear me say that, because next year we'll probably have to increase and look at increasing at least by one as we move forward. But as for this year alone, I think we can sustain that 39. We're at 38 right now, officers. We've got our 39th that'll be on for the commission meeting on Monday, and that doesn't count our seasonal SROs. We are going to lose one seasonal SRO after this school year, but I've already got some interest, so I think that'll be something we can replace and not be in a position where one school is lacking. So just as we talk about numbers and people, you know, this is just 2024, last year at a glance. You know, when I say events of police activity, that means traffic stops, paper service, proactivity, and calls for service. We're at over 16,000. I've been the assistant chief for a long time now. I've not seen that number decrease, and I don't think we're going to. We average about 1,300 events per month. Our officers and detectives, you know, this is just some brief stuff. 600 case reports, over 2,400 citations for criminal and non-criminal offenses. And we talk all the time, you guys have heard us say it before, our two-person calls continue to increase. Those are all two-person calls, except for traffic stops. Alarms are always a two-person response, 729. Disturbances, 428, almost 500 domestics. Drug, alcohol-related, 361. And collisions, which sometimes 2, 3, 4 officers, depending on location and severity, 1,164. That's a lot. And we've increased our traffic enforcement, and believe it or not, we have seen some of these collisions actually go down, and you're still seeing 1,164. We've got the Mach-E, and we have Officer Ferguson that is assigned to traffic every day, and that's helped a lot. You do see it decreasing, but it's also helped our citizens because we get calls all the time that we can't send a patrol person to name the street in the neighborhood where they're running stop signs and speeding. We can't take somebody from patrol and say, don't go to the domestic, don't go to this, go sit there. But we can with Officer Ferguson. So that has been a game changer for us. So that's just kind of at a glance. And as I said, I think we sustain our staffing levels. We can make it again without asking for anybody else. We want to focus on some of those internal changes. And Chief Gray kind of mentioned this the last time. This is our current organization. You got the chief, you got myself, patrol. We have 2 captains. And on patrol, we have an admin captain, which is in charge of fleet, uniforms, and equipment. We have Captain Mullins over our alcohol beverage control, and we have a captain over the detectives. On patrol, we have 4 sergeants. We also have an admin sergeant, which is Sergeant Rainwater. He's over our codes enforcement now. We have 3 additional detectives. So when you look at it, you've got 21 officers assigned to patrol, and then you add your 6 supervisors on patrol. So you've got 27 officers on patrol. We run 9 a shift. That's a good place to be. I would love to see in the next 2 to 3 years we get to a point where we've got 10, because that will help. And then we've got our SROs, 2 K9s who are on patrol as well. and one parking enforcement officer, which is Nick Bowden. You know, he does parking and the parking garage, and then we have Ian as our codes enforcement officer. Currently, as we said, we got 911, our director, assistant director. We've implemented a rank structure there, and we have 2 senior telecommunicators. They kind of operate like our sergeants do, as far as in charge of a shift. And then we have our 9 dispatchers. We're currently hiring 1 dispatcher. Currently, we have 1 dispatcher that we just hired and is in training. So that's where we're at currently, and kind of this is where we want to go as far as our organizational structure to help us be more efficient. So we want to add 1 assistant chief position that will oversee the daily dispatch operations, all right? So that'd be great if you could say, well, why can't the current assistant chief do it right now? That's me, because I have SROs, patrol, and investigations that fall under me. I can't take dispatch either, neither can Chief Gray, so we feel that we need a higher level commander to be over that and oversee the day-to-day operations. We're gonna add 1 patrol captain position. We would love to add 1 code parking enforcement officer. Right now, we have Nick, who, if he leaves the parking garage to go try to do any type of spot checks on parking, then patrol is gonna get called to the parking garage for something. An arm won't come up, somebody can't get a ticket, and that's just the way it is. So we really need him there. Sergeant Rainwater and Ian are currently over codes, and I'll tell you, I'm here every day, and I watch them leave out of here about 8:30 to 9 every morning, and they hit the streets. They're overwhelmed, and we would love to add 1 person for them to continue to assist. We did lose a code parking enforcement officer, and we've not reassigned that. So that is on our wish list to get 1 additional person. So really what we would see in a new rank structure is our chief, our 2 assistant chiefs. We would have 6 captains. We would have 3 captains on patrol, and then you would have your 2 admin captains still, and 3 on patrol, 1 over ABC, 1 over fleet and equipment, 4 sergeants, 3 on patrol, and then Sergeant Rainwater. That looks like a whole lot of movement and a whole lot of promotions, but in reality, when you break this down and you really look at it, you're only turning a sergeant into a captain, and you're turning someone into an assistant chief. Everything else is just backfilling the open spots with existing staff. So I foresee this really being minimal impact to our budget as far as personnel and staffing, because even though it looks like a lot of movement, it's not creating a lot more positions that don't already exist. Really just a patrol captain and an assistant chief in a nutshell. So this is what we would look like. We all know we have a pending retirement in the 911 center, and that's our director. So that's one of the reasons we would like for that assistant chief, that second assistant chief would take over that director's position. We still have an assistant director. We still have our 2 senior telecommunicators and our other dispatchers. So we wouldn't fill the director's role. We would utilize the assistant chief in that director role, would be our ultimate plan for dispatch. So that's how it would look there. You would have patrol, the assistant chief, the captains would move to 3. You still have your current admin captain and your ABC captain, and then your captain over detectives. Nothing changes there. You do see some change in the patrol structure, because instead of 2 captains on patrol and 4 sergeants, you have 3 sergeants and 3 captains. And I know that's spitting out a lot of rank structure, paramilitary type stuff, but it's pretty simple, really, when you think about it. And then once again, like I said, we'd like to add that 1 code enforcement officer. So a whole lot of rank structure and assignment changes, but all this we feel will make us more efficient in our day-to-day operations. And this is not something that is foreign to the rank structure of the department, because we've operated with 2 assistant chiefs before, and we always had operated at one point with 3 captains and 3 sergeants on patrol. So this is not something new that we're just made up. This is something that has existed here before. So that is our proposed organizational structure and our wish list as far as it comes to our personnel. Some other things, that you'll see as we progress forward in the budget process is those things you see every year that are big ticket items costing that are not going to change. Watch guard, that's our camera systems, those fees, the flock cameras. Overtime, it's going to continue to increase. If we add 45 officers tomorrow, we're still going to have a lot of overtime because folks want us at events. We talked about the balloon race. He talked about, it took me 4 officers out there on overtime last year to make sure nobody got killed in traffic, because he said that's a big event. The downtown events, people want to see us. People want to know we're there. They want to feel safe, and we've got to get to these things, and we are. So you're always going to see that overtime just increasing your events, whether it's a run downtown or a parade, brass band, the fair. I mean, the fair, that's a lot of people packed into a lot of area. You need police there just in case. So that's where we're at. Like I said, you're going to continue to see that increase. But like I said, we feel we need to prioritize the rank structure right now instead of asking for 2 to 3 more officers. That's what we want to focus on. We are going to be getting new cars, for this budget year. We didn't do cars last year. We've got 6. One has to be a new K-9 car. We've got to get rid of some of these 2017s that are still floating around. If you've ever rode an 8-year-old patrol car, it's not fun. Most of those are in pool, but we're trading those things in. So, that helps us with that cost of the cars. Some other big things you may see that we asked for is there is a big push for weapon-mounted optics, pistol optics. It's being pushed at the academy. They're training officers with it now. We're exploring that. If we armed all our pistols with optics, which is like a red dot, type thing, you'd probably be looking at a $20,000 project, that we would want to do. So those are just things that are kind of in the hopper that we want to prioritize, that are going to be out there that you may see pop up. But this is our main focus right now, is that reorganization. Your time is important, so I'll stop.
Questions, comments?
Sure. What have you figured would be, not going to add police officers, but you are going to change categories, so what's the financial impact?
So we've got a meeting set with Mr. Boyd to go through all that and look at the financial impact. And once again, it's just, we don't know where compensation is going to be in July, right? As far as additional compensation and things like that. So we're going to have a good kind of hold on where that's going to be to know how much if we promote a captain to assistant chief, what's that raise going to look like? 10 grand, maybe 15, but I don't foresee that creeping up into the range of what it's going to cost to do one full-time officer. And I could be wrong there until we actually go through the numbers with a fine-tooth comb, which we will, and we'll get that in front of you. But I see that as being, minimal. Minimal cost for us, yeah.
Commissioner, the budget where we're at now is what our options that Randy will go through in a minute on pay changes overall for all the existing employees in the existing positions. And so what Randy and I will do is take all the department requests, we will assemble those as one document, and then we will try to figure out our baseline recommendation against all of those. And then, which we do see the recommendations that or the requests he is making, or the department is making, is really the next iteration of those consolidation of operations that we've talked about, cleaning up our organizational chart. This is just really, for me, when I look at it, the next iteration of that. So it should be manageable, but but we'll do all of that as a second step. So right now, until we get past this initial, this is what we're recommending with pay this year, this is, generally where we're at, till we know that, then the second discussion really can't be had, because we won't know what the baseline is. I hope that makes sense with, yeah.
Any other comments or questions to Mr. Carl? Anything?
No, was thinking the fact that they're not asking for more personnel right now that may be a first. And I think that's a credit to them and maybe to the salary structure we have now. I hope.
It's helping retain, definitely, so we feel that we can hold off. Like I said, you can pay $75 an hour. It's police work. People are going to retire. People are going to have attrition. People are going to have geographical reasons for leaving. They're going to get out of the business. That's just commonplace in policing. We feel we're solid right now with staff, who we have, where we're at. You can always probably bet on average to lose a police officer or two a year a lot of times, but that's okay. We can sustain some losses. We can't sustain an exodus. We can't have 4 or 5 walk out in a year. When we were seeing that, it was
We've been
part of
there, yeah.
compensation. We're not seeing that anymore.
Thank goodness.
So,
And on the patrol cars, they're part of our lease fleet, aren't they?
They
Or
are,
rotation?
and we have, Enterprise over the last 2 years has done a good job of when they provide us a budget for the upcoming year, and their vehicles from those 2017s that need to roll over are included, but that goes, it goes into your debt service category, so those are built in. So you will see that, compared to last year, in the general fund, that number does go up a little bit, but you've got about 6 vehicles that are rolling off that have been fully paid.
Right.
And we were paying minimal maintenance fees on, and now you have some new vehicles. But I think in total, the general fund increase for fleet is 20,000-ish, and then we actually saw reductions in other funds, so.
we do it. It works pretty well for us because if we get 6, we're usually going to give 6. We actually had a little talk with with our fleet manager yesterday, and we've also got we've got $17,000 from a truck that's sitting there that's, available too, according to his, calculation. So I think we'll be okay, as far as those vehicles come. Your big cost with your vehicles is you get 6 vehicles, well, it's the equipment. It's almost 80. You're going to see, you'll see this bill, but it's going to be $80,000 for camera stuff to get in them, and you can't live without them. You can't police without them. So you got to have it. Can't not pay for it. So that's going to be your watch guard system, your body cameras. It all links up together. You guys see those fees that reoccur, but for 6 bundles is what you call it. A bundle is everything you need for that car. 6 bundles is about $80K.
Well,
So-
and then it's with the modern car, the technology in them. One of the vehicles that's still owned by the city, the transmission went out of it recently. That was an $8,000 repair. And so the fleet program, you don't see all those expenses either. So with the addition of, because they're all typically going to be under warranty still, but in addition to rolling the fleet over more efficiently and usually at a better price point and transaction, the ease of that transaction, in addition to that, you're still avoiding all those maintenance costs. So you got to remember that.
Yep.
That's a big,
It's
that
a
is a
saving.
significant thing, right?
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Next on our agenda is compensation plan update. Mr. Randy Boyd.
All right, good morning, everyone. Just before we get started, I do just kind of compartmentalize where we're at in the budget process. Just want to reiterate kind of some things that Earl talked about. So when we look at the budget every year, it's it's really a three-step, when I talk about budget, I'm talking about the personnel budget. It's a three-step process. First is we really have to do our healthcare renewals, which obviously we did those in March, so we've got to know what those costs are. Then we develop our compensation plan because we've got our base budget already built out. The compensation plan is step 2, and the step 3 would be, as Earl alluded to, our organizational changes or staffing proposals, I like to call it. So it's really a three-step process. So this is step 2 of that process. So we'll kind of go through this, show you what our methodology is, very similar to what we did last year, so it should be somewhat familiar, but then show you what that personnel budget would look like, total encompassing of the costs that we put into it for raises, but also some other variables, which I'll kind of talk about here. So we'll just start into that, and then we'll kind of, if you want to stop me at any point, just let me know, or we can come back, hold everything to the end, whatever you prefer, okay? So as far as strategy, our strategy really hasn't changed a lot. We rolled out a strategy, about 5 years ago. I think it's probably going on year 6, is just to really do annual reviews of the market, stay on top of the market. We know the labor market's changing quickly. Our goal was to get us as close to competitive to the market as we can and maintain that. So every year for the last 5 years, we've contracted with Hannah Resource Group to do our market studies, to identify where we're at, how much variance is between our jobs that we currently pay, and then also like what the gap would be to fill those, to get those to the market. So that really is the same methodology. But also, and Earl and I have a lot of conversations about this and with the other department heads, one of the things with payroll too is it's a unique expenditure because it's a long-term liability versus an expense. And what I mean by that is, okay, maybe we do a $3 million capital project. Well, that's $3 million one time, but if you add $1 million to your budget, that's a long-term liability that you have to sustain. So we are always trying to be cognizant of that long-term sustainability of payroll. And so when you look at that, there's a lot of factors that go into that, inflation, labor market demand. As you heard Chief Doan talk about here, or Assistant Chief Doan, overtime and demands for services, that's something that we really factored in the budget this year too, and we'll talk about that with our variable costs, because demands for service, overtime, all those things are going up. So that impacts not only the budget, but also how we address compensation going forward, okay? All right. So right here is just a breakdown of your current workforce, authorized jobs. As of today, we've got 177 authorized positions with the city. 88 of those are in public safety. I did include, even though they're non-hazardous, I always think 911 needs to be included in that public safety discussion. And then municipal utilities, we have 46 staff members there. And then your other departments, what I just call your general government services, which encompasses everything else, we have 43 employees. So you can see more the last couple of years, we've invested more heavily in public safety. That number has gone up as demands, and also municipal water utilities. I mean, we talk about public safety aspect of water, and that's really key, especially with what we're seeing right now, just how important water utilities is to the public with all the flooding that we've seen. So when we get into compensation, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of variables we have to look at every year. One of those first variables is our retirement contribution rates. Thankfully, the last couple of years, we've seen a decrease in those rates as CRS is, they've broken out to their own fiduciary board, and they've done a really good job. And so the overall plan is healthy, which means that those rates go down. So we are going to see a decrease for FY26 on both hazardous and non-hazardous, but we always caution though, because that's a variable cost, those rates could go back up at any time. Like during COVID, we saw a year-over-year increase on hazardous duty that capped out almost 50%. Well, for FY26, it's 35%. Well, that's a big difference in our labor costs, right? But we don't know year over year what those are going to be like. So we really have to start with that and factor that into the equation. And then, when we look at our compensation, obviously we're trying to keep pace with inflation. Your DLG COLA rates, this is your last 4 fiscal years. You can see last year was 3.4%. This year, a marginal decrease at 2.9%. That's always our benchmark to try to work off of, is that the COLA rate to keep pace with inflation. And then on your right here, you see your personnel structure. These are all the things that encompass salary. So anytime that we make a salary change, like if it's a base salary, we have to factor in everything proportionally. Like if you, for example, if you raise a budget by 3%, you've got to factor that into not only your base salaries, but your overtime, your retirement, because we pay retirement on total credible compensation, which is all total earnings. And then, of course, obviously, healthcare, which is that first big piece of the puzzle when we start putting the budget together. Okay. So with that said, this is a breakdown of the compensation study. We completed it back in January with Hannah Resource Group. What's nice about this is we've got a good partnership with them, and because we've been doing it annually, we've got a pretty systematic way of doing things, and it's really been streamlined. So in simple terms, we just provide them with our current compensation plan, all of our salary ranges. We provide them with our job descriptions. They go out and just compare that against the market, and they tell us essentially how much we're off market by each job class, based on our population size and different variable factors as well. In simple terms, for this year's report, the average market variance, and keep in mind, it varies by sector. Like you may see a different variance for, say, police, fire, water utilities, et cetera. But your range of being off variance was between 6 and 15%. Now, keep in mind, that doesn't factor in our total rewards program. Like, you know, one of the unique factors for the city is obviously the healthcare program. So we have a little bit richer program. So you got to factor that into your overall compensation discussion as well. And then, of course, they provide us with recommended pay grades, which we have that report. And then, in summary, when you look at the overall report, the average market variance when you put all of your job classifications together was 9.9%. Okay. Now, so that takes us to what are our options for compensation. So really, there's 3 options for us for the upcoming plan year. Number 1, maintain your existing pay classification grades. That's option 1. And just move every employee to their next experience step, right? And we talk about that because that's important too, because that maintains pay equity across your system. To do that, that would be approximately 1.929% additional to your budget. That's $189,000 in total personnel cost. Option 2 would be to do a COLA plus an experience step, which that means you would raise your grades by the DLG rate of 2.9% and then move everybody up their next step on their scale. That total cost is approximately $559,000, which would be 2.5% above your current FY26 budget. And then option 3 would be to do a full market adjustment. Go in that route. If you did it, average it out, that would be approximately another 6.5% on top of the budget, which would be roughly $1.4 million. So as we look at this, you know, when we talk about what is our recommendation, well, our recommendation really is to kind of go in the middle here for sustainability purposes. So what we're recommending for this year is to do the COLA plus the experience step. And when you put that together, what that means is, you know, obviously each employee is going to get a different adjustment, but nobody would be less than that COLA amount. But the average increase would be approximately 4%. One thing that, you know, we look at too with this is we've always kind of, and Earl and I were looking at this the other day, we're kind of like 5% lag on the market on average from what the market studies year over year. So, but when you factor in, so if we did this, average employee rate's 4%, the market says we're averaged it out 9.9%. So you're keeping that 5% lag in place, but we also need to factor in that our healthcare package makes up a big portion of that, because and those are conversations we have a lot when we're recruiting employees, is looking at not only, obviously we want to be competitive on salaries, but we want to maintain those benefits. But really at the end of the day, when we sit down with folks, when we show them that benefit package versus maybe they're coming from another employer where they pay healthcare, at the end of the day, their salary may be, you know, lateral, but their net pays more because they're not having to pay in healthcare. So that, you got to think, we think about that when we talk about that 5% lag, because it really is made up in all our total rewards and our health packages. But again, with that being said, we feel like with the costs that we absorb with health insurance this year, we did see a pretty significant increase, but this is probably the most sustainable model. Now, and again, this is really the same model that we put in place last year. If you remember, we did a 3.4% COLA plus an experience step, so it's very consistent with what we proposed last year. And then when it comes to individual employee pay adjustments, there are variables there. Not every employee would be identical because it would be based on what scale they're on, like non-hazardous is 27-year scale, hazardous is 20, depends on their years of experience, and then also what is their step increase on their grade range too. So there's variables there, but when you average it out, like I said, the average is about 4% increase for city staff as a whole. Okay? And then with the recommendation, this is a 5-year trend of what your personnel overall, and this is total personnel budget encompassing of all labor costs. This is what it would look like. So for FY25, your budget was $21.4 million. For FY26, without the compensation adjustment, incorporating some of the things we talked about, like, we did built in more factors for overtime because that is something that's going up. Like you heard the police talk about that. So there is demands for that. So 22.2 million is your budget right now with no changes. That's to cover your base liability, no staffing changes. Keeping your staffing numbers the same, which we talked about, we'll come back with the staffing proposal at, the next meeting. Your budget with the recommendations would be 22.8 million, which is that roughly 560,000 increase that we're proposing for compensation. And then when you look at, well, what does that mean as far as like changes? So this is your 5-year trend on your personnel budget, your variance. So if you look at the last few years, like FY24, 23, you can see that was a $1 million change. 24, 25, it went up about approximately 800,000. Same for FY25, 26, that variance is 800,000 with no changes, but with the compensation and the healthcare, the variance this year would be 1.44 million. But again, I just say without any changes, your variance is going to be 800,000, and there's a lot. And I've got some more slides to talk about where those variables are coming from for the proposed budget. And then compensation adjustment history. So we go back to FY22. You can see the city has been very consistent with investing in its human capital. It obviously has paid dividends in not only recruiting quality employees, but also retaining those. This year alone, cities have a 1% turnover rate, so you've got a 99% retention rate. And that's really, especially when you talk about safety personnel and just how difficult that market is. We've actually been able to kind of strengthen our recruitment on utilities as well, which is another area we've talked about quite a bit, that we're going to see a lot of attrition. So, the key is not just today, it's position ourselves for the next 2 to 3 years, especially when we talk about the succession plans that we're working on this year, because we know we've got that 30% pie chart that can, and that's a lot of knowledge base that could walk out of the city. And there's, so we got to just think, this is all investment. But you can see your compensation has been very consistent. That FY24, that one's higher because if you remember, that was the year that we did the mid-year adjustment for safety personnel, because we saw a pretty large exodus there, and the labor market was pushing on fire and police. But since that time, we've not really lost any safety personnel. And, again, we've been able to get quality, not just, it's quality over quantity, but the quantity of applicants has increased as well for every job that we recruit for. And then this is a breakdown. So with the recommended changes, when we talk about the budget, this is what it looks like by fund type. So obviously, a large portion of your personnel comes out of your general fund. So 15.4 million would be out of the general fund, 5.3 out of utility, and then, your Parks and Rec is approximately 1.1 million, and then you've got your stormwater and cemetery fund. So that's how it's broke. Your personnel cost comes out by fund type. So I just wanted to break that out for you. And again, that encompasses that whole 22.8 million cost. And then this is a breakdown by individual departments. Obviously, typically, and that's natural to see that police and fire is higher because you've got more staff in those areas. Obviously, they've got more demands on them for overtime, and so there's other factors. And plus, you're talking about hazardous duty retirement, which is a higher rate compared to non-hazardous. All right, so this is a breakdown of your costs. So when you look at your salaries, 51% of your personnel budget is your base known fixed costs. That's your base salaries, that's your longevity pay. Then you've got your hazardous duty retirement and non-hazardous duty combined, they make up 15%. While those are known quantities as far as year to year, we still look at that as a variable cost because we don't know year over year what those retirement rates are going to be, so we got to plan for that. Good news is we get those rates usually earlier in the year, around January, so it allows us to start planning earlier. And then you've got incentive pay, that's your state incentives that you pay for your police and firefighters, which obviously those get reimbursed from the state. But then FICA, that's your payroll tax. So sometimes we don't talk enough about FICA taxes. Lee hears me talk about this a lot, but so for every dollar you match, your employer has to pay 7.65% match on payroll taxes that the employee pays in. That's your Social Security tax, which is 6.2%, your Medicare tax, which is 1.45%. So we always have to really be cognizant. So anytime you work overtime, your employees are paying taxes, the employer is having to do that 7.65% match. And so all those things have to come into factor, which again is why we talk about making sure we can sustain those, because those liabilities are always going to be there for every dollar that you pay. And then your variable labor costs, that really encompasses your health care, which we know we've got funds built into our reserves to account for max liability, but when you talk about your cost centers, we really don't know, right? Those things are unplanned, but we have reserves to cover our max liability. And, we may have a good year and not have to hit that, but those variable costs are built into your departments. And so when we budget for healthcare, we're estimating based on known claims where those healthcare dollars will come out of the departments. Again, if I had a crystal ball, I wish I could pinpoint it down to the dollar, but we can't. And then overtime. So that's the other thing I wanted to talk about. For this year, I've sat down, I've talked to Chief Gray, I've talked to Chief Simpson, Marshall and I have talked a lot, Earl and I spoke about it. One of the things that we saw this year is we really got to factor in, we build a little bit more cushion in overtime because like natural disasters, for example, it's no secret that in this Kentucky, we're seeing more natural disasters that calls for more overtime, whether it's public services, water utilities, whatever it may be. I don't see those things going away, so we've had to build in more. Now, hopefully, if we have, we can manage those overtime, because sometimes you may not need those funds, but what you don't want to do is under budget and then go over on your budget, so that's a conservative approach. And then if we budget, say, $100,000 in a department for overtime, and then we come back and say we're going to raise salaries by 4%, well, you need to adjust your overtime proportionally because that's an overtime rate. That overtime rate goes up 4%. So again, there's a lot of variables that go into that, and so we just wanted to explain those things because those thoughts are what drives our methodology behind our recommendations to the commission and the city. Mm-hmm. And so where do we go from here? Well, pretty simple. I think we maintain what we're doing. I think we continue to look at everything annually, because one of the things we don't want to do is skip a year and have a big gap to close. It's a lot easier to adjust salaries, say $300,000 or $400,000 versus $1 million in a year, And so with this market and ever changing, normally in years past, and I've talked about this, traditionally biannually is a good time to do market adjustments, but I don't think with what we're seeing, it's a good idea. I think we got to continue to look at the market, and also not just look at the market, look at our overall organizational chart. We always talk about restructuring or reorganization is very fluid. I know for myself, our department, I talked about safety a lot at our last meeting. So it's things like that we have to continue to think about, like how do we continue to adjust our structure to make sure it meets our needs overall. And that's something I think we've done a good job of, but we got to continue to press forward. Okay. And then but going back to the slide, as I mentioned, when you look at your adjustments, again, you know, if you look at this pie chart of what you've done over, the city's done year over year, you know, skipping a year or two, that's a pretty big gap to close if you don't stay on top of it. At least look at it annually. And again, I know there's a lot of budget factors, revenue, other operational expenses, all that's got to be factored in. But, so with that said, I mean, our recommendation is that, is the COLA plus the experience step, which on average, and again, I do say some employees would be above that 4%, some would be below. That's an average variable, but, this model would give every employee no less than 2.9%, depending on where they're at on their scale. So, and again, that'd be roughly $560,000, and that factors in those adjustments for overtime, your retirement, all your personnel costs, FICA taxes, all that's been factored into that. So, okay. It's a lot of information, so, so try to keep it as simple as we can, but there's a lot of variables there that we have to look at.
It's good information, that's for sure. The numbers can be intimidating, but good information.
Randy, can you remind me or remind us what the health care increase was this year? I know
Yeah, it was, if we hit max law, so we budget for max, Commissioner Sirius, if we budget for max, which means we may be below that, it's roughly just shy of 500,000 was our increase, but 500,000, and that's total compensation. But we also want to keep in mind, we expanded our benefits too. We enhanced our dental and our vision benefit coverage and life coverage, you know. We also added more to our line of duty rider for safety personnel too, so. But the medical itself was approximately 460,000 in increase over a prior year. Now, that number could drop if we, you know, have a good plan year, and we're trying to work more on wellness programs and things of those nature to try to do more on cost containment. But yeah, that's really, in summary, is just shy of 500,000 total increase.
How many employees full-time?
177. Yep. Now, we do have a couple of vacant positions, but authorized is 177.
Okay. Early on, you mentioned sustainability, and I think back when we decided to take on, trying to get our salaries up to market, that would be a big issue, is how to maintain that progress and not go back. I don't have an answer. It's just something you're still thinking about, I'm sure.
Yeah.
That gives me some pause, not about the raises, just, you know, our overall.
I'll chime in a little bit, because Randy and I do talk about that a lot.
I didn't really
And
want
he
to hear from you,
talks-
but.
He talks with Earl about it
Yeah.
as well, and Earl and I talk about it. And this is my stance a little bit, is that we will likely never be fully at market. Most governments won't. When you consider our benefits package, that is a part of employee compensation. But the market, though, swings. And governments typically, unless you lose employees to attrition or worst case scenario, which the city hasn't been in an extremely long time, and I don't know if we've ever done it, but you would potentially lay people off, right? We don't reduce salaries back down, whereas, a company, a market might lay off a good portion of their higher paid staff and hire in some folks that'll do it for half the price. So a big portion of us trying to at least maintain the same gap from the market that we had in previous years is our continuing the step process and then adjusting our steps for inflation through a COLA.
Yeah.
It's not perfect, but I think Randy has done a really good job on doing what we can to stay as close to market as we reasonably can without straining our finances in dangerous ways.
Go to slide
Okay.
9, Randy.
Thank
Yeah, that's what I was,
The one right before
which one do you want this?
before that.
Yep.
So this year, your non-direct payroll cost is 1.4 million. That's your health insurance, that's your all other roll-up expenses tied to employees. So then, when we're talking about being under market, not all of your private sector absorbs all of that 1.4. Some of those costs are shared directly through health benefits or whatever. The employees do contribute some towards that number. We're not asking that. And so the critical thing for Randy and I, when we started looking at it, and I would try to have separate conversations with the league so that I wasn't polluting the benefit conversation with the pure finances. And so I think collectively, we had enough conversations that we feel comfortable with the sustainability of the existing recommendation, right? And so then to confirm what that is with a just volume number is so our cost is that is known, the health benefits and whatnot, it's $1.4 million on that slide. So then we looked at the market said so last year when we finished the budget, we were about 4 or 5% under the market, which was kind of this number, the $1.4 million number is under the market. And so then when we go into this year, we had slid against that number a little bit. And so then when we looked at the recommendation of the COLA, which is the next slide, the cost on the $560,000 number, that's towards pay against the market, right? Direct pay against the market is that $560,000 increase. And so then when you look at that, that closes us back down to the market, which is your 2.9% plus the experience step average of right at 5% or just under 5%, 4 point something. So then when that number pulls back down, you're back to that 5% under the market number, right? So that's kind of the critical thing for us three as we talked through it is we needed to not lose ground against the market. So as long as we're stable against the market, we're kind of rising and trending in that direction. But those two slides are what the expenses are, right? The 1.4 is your health insurance and your increases in overtime and those secondary expenses. And then this is the direct pay expense increase, is the 560, the way we are recommending it right now, right? Which, go to that slide again, the three options on the slide, the two before that, or three, that one. Option 2 is where we're at. And the reason we landed on option 2 was it got us to the same level against the market as we did, as we were essentially last year, which is that 5% number under the market. So if you go to option 3 and close the market, you can do that. That's really expensive. If you go to option 1, I don't think that's sufficient against the market. You lose ground to the market if you do just strictly option 1. Right?
Yeah, and then if you do option 1, then it goes back to that conversation we talked about earlier. Then you put yourself in a position where maybe in a year or two, you've got to close a bigger gap. Maybe you're seeing a lot of turnover and key positions that you're having a hard time to recruit back.
Option 1 was no change, right? Or did it include COLA?
It was the experience step only, no COLA.
Experience.
Yeah.
Right. Which is just basically you go, in the pay scale, you go from year, whatever, 5 to year 6.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think one thing, that maybe we don't want to lose in sight, we talk about that 5% lag. So when we look at and talking to our constituents around other cities and other, really other employers in general, it's very rare the package that the city has that you see we're probably in the 1 percentile with our benefit package. So like, for example, yes, we want to keep going towards the market, but when we say we're 5% lag, probably when you look at total cost, probably not really. So like, for example, let's say you take the city and you have another employer, they both pay $60,000, I'm just giving fake numbers, $60,000 for the same job, okay? Well, the city has this health care plan that's paid for, which, if it's a family level coverage, you're talking about probably in cost sharing somewhere around $10,000 a year. So really, in essence, that's a $70,000 package where hey, maybe this person, this employer over here pays 65, we pay 60, but they're paying for healthcare. In essence, their package with the city is richer. Now, with that being said, though, that 60,000, we still need to keep growing it. So it's really, when you look at it in totality, we're truly not 5% below market, because then but that's the other thing we've got to continue to work on. We talk about total rewards, our vacation and sick programs, those are richer. We've got, more on career development and different things that we've invested in. So I think it doesn't, again, I don't want to say we won't lose sight of it. It's not what we're saying, but what we're saying is that 5% we got to factor in. It really is not truly 5% when you look at what's my net take-home pay that I'm putting into my pocket at the end of the day. Is it better at the city than it is at employers? The answer is yes. And then also our health plans, and we have lower deductible plans than most employers too, and that's the other part of it.
Well, and so then what we're trying to manage to is not do things under duress.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
So that we make, if you're doing them in front of duress, you're making a better decision, right?
Yeah.
And so what we're trying to do is, I feel like that we want to continue to have that conversation, because that's the pressure all of us feel, right? About, health insurance. We know we can't continue to absorb that impact.
Yeah.
And the way our revenue streams are and that kind of thing. So we want to have that conversation before you have to have that conversation,
Yeah.
right? And so if we can get through and create this budget and we're balanced and good, I do think we need to have that conversation and develop that conversation in August and September. Normally, those are 2 months where we try to go back to some catch-up business. October, that 3-month window to start the year, I really feel like maybe might be a good time to flush through that conversation a little bit more deeply and really see what the temperament is long-term, so that you can be in a position to not have to make a decision under duress. You can make a decision without the pressure of passing the budget, let's get into it, see what the long-term policy needs to be, and make that in good faith for all parties involved without any pressure of creating a budget, finishing the budget, making a decision because you're desperate for money, those kinds of things. Let's make that while we can with the full control that we have, rather than when we don't have as much control. Yeah, so I would like to continue, I would say that to reaffirm clearly that what I'd like to do is have those conversations about those benefits August and September and October after, because I do think we can get to a point with the expenses, the way we've proposed them, to where we do have a balanced budget base, and you'll see some of the numbers here in a minute. But I think that's probably the better way to handle it, honestly.
I'm going to bring up something, and I hope people don't shoot me for it, because I'm not advocating it, but we become city nerds and read about cities all the time up here after a
Right.
while, and overtime happened to be one of the things they were talking about.
Yeah.
And some cities charge the event the overtime costs, or a portion thereof. Have we ever thought about that?
We do have the event fees. We don't have a strong history ever of fully recouping those expenses. Part of that is just the acknowledgement of, if somebody's going to do something in your town, you got an obligation to provide public safety, fire protection, that kind of thing, just broadly in general. So just because someone's having a special event doesn't necessarily mean that your obligation goes away, right? You can have, the restaurants on Main Street can have a bunch of people eating dinner on the sidewalk, requires the same level of security as if it was a special event, just on a normal basis, which is my point. So, yeah, you need to manage the ones that particularly are causing you direct overtime, like Assistant Chief Doan mentioned. Those are easy to identify. But then the other events as they come through, we do need to do a better job with that. And I think all of us acknowledge that, but there again, that's not a new problem. We've never really done that
Right,
correctly.
yeah.
I mean, or not, it's not that it's incorrect. We've never done that fully because of that baseline we're required to provide security for the community to maintain economic vitality. Well, economic vitality is doing special events.
Yes.
Right.
Right, so,
And you hope that the event brings in, you know, money to the city and
right,
evens itself out eventually anyway.
Right.
But I just thought I don't ever remember us talking about it.
we don't, but that is something that should come up along the way.
And Commissioner Peak had requested that we review all our
Right.
fees, and that's on one of the
Okay.
lists to do. Probably, but that would require a ordinance change. So we would not include it directly in the budget process. It would be a conversation of this ordinance specifically related to, I believe that one is the special events ordinance, would need to be adjusted as we go through, and then kind of creating a better process for,
We talked about that last year. That's one of those conversations we need to have in August and September and October and be intentional about that. What happens is, again, we get drugged down into just doing the other things that we do. But we want to have those conversations in that time period for sure.
Yeah, and we, to avoid any distress, I mean, this has been part of our strategic management plan for our department is just to continuously look at these things. And Earl and I talk about healthcare, labor costs. It's a continuous conversation to avoid distress. And so that's why I say, it goes back to what I said earlier, we just got to look at this, annualize and continue to plan it. Because like, yeah, you talk about your overtime, it's a great example. Like for every dollar of overtime, if you just look at that chart, for a police officer, for every dollar of overtime, it costs the city, $1 and, 13 cents per dollar of overtime because of your retirement and payroll taxes. So there's a lot that goes into those variable costs outside just the base pay that you're paying.
Well, and how long when did you start working on the health insurance renewal? Help me.
December.
Yes.
November, December. So it's a long process.
Right, so like, we'll get done with the budget, he'll go through July and update the budget numbers, go through the payroll system. By August, you've got to have all that done.
Yeah.
So you've just got like a 3-4 month window there to do the regular work that we do before you get into,
Yeah.
or the, these initiatives
Yeah.
that you're gonna try to embark on before you get into the next need to negotiate and begin that total renewal.
And
So it's a heavier schedule for him. But we try to do it more in depth, right? Like, so we've got an HR director who's working on that in December and part of November, right? So,
Yeah, we really haven't dove into it yet, but we will. When we talk about your staffing plan, you hear about like the needs for departments. Sometimes that can be an offset too, because, if you bring in additional position, that would help drive down overtime costs and some of those variable costs. So there's a methodology to that as well to factor in, because that's the other thing. We don't, demand for services, everyone's activities are increasing because the city's growing, which is a good thing, but also we don't want to lose sight of being able to position ourselves to bring in additional staff and key positions too. So that's the other aspect of it. So there's a lot of puzzles that connect to this when we talk about trying to factor in everything to the greater good of everybody, and make sure we're progressively moving forward.
Other comments?
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
sorry,
Go ahead.
yeah. You had a slide on payroll revenue. Can we look at that again?
You want the personnel budget total cost? Is that what you? I had one on total budget.
You had one with revenue, I think.
This one didn't have revenue. This one was just, these reports were just
I
expenditure.
thought I remember seeing one with revenue.
Not on this, no, these were all expenses, so this is your personnel budget expense numbers that we're showing. Like, this is your total personnel budget cost over your 5-year trend, and then there's your budget variance, based on changes, and then that's what our compensation adjustment amounts have been over the.
Maybe I'm confused yet with the bars going horizontal that
Oh.
had Parks and Rec. And
This is your cost, personnel cost by department. But then this is your cost by fund type. But these are all expenses.
Okay, that's what I was
But it does
thinking.
help you look at, say, what does the revenues need to be to cover these expenditures? And then this is the breakdown by individual department. So if you look at Parks and Rec, if you mention that one, that's roughly 1.1 million in personnel costs for the upcoming year.
Go back to the previous slide, because it points out one thing that we always like to reiterate. Majority of the expenses for these funds is payroll. And it's by a large amount. Like the cost to operate and provide the services is the people. And therefore, the direct, so it's, some folks will say, well, let's provide better service. Well, you gotta pay better ultimately. So then if you go to the next, the difference is the utility fund. The utility fund is the only one where a majority of the expenses there is stuff. Electrical service, pump replacement, maintenance, et cetera. So that's the only one where what I just said is not accurate.
And on a rough, we'll get to numbers, but roughly, out of your general fund, you've got 15.4 million in personnel. Your total budget is about 22. Utilities, like Earl said, is the opposite. You're running about 12 million in operations, so roughly close to half. Park and Rec, you have about a $1.8 million budget. 1.1 is personnel. Cemetery, theirs is about a 350 to 400. Close to half is personnel. Stormwater, their budget is maybe 700,000 in operations, 634 is personnel.
Yeah, we did, and then on the.
And the
park-
cemetery, that doesn't count the mowing contract
Yeah,
too,
another contract is about $130,000.
which is offsetting payroll expenses, so.
And then on Parks and Recreation, I want to say out of that 1.1, and roughly 700,000 of that is part-time labor too, because part-time is critical to functioning in Parks and Recreation. We only have, I think, 8 full-time staff members in Parks and Rec. The big bulk of that is part-time expenditures.
Okay, thanks. And I think we're going to talk about revenues at some other point here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll
We'll-
get
yeah.
into the next section.
Okay,
We'll
very good.
talk
Thank you.
revenues versus expenses.
That's where she gets excited.
Well, I appreciate everyone's time. If you have any questions.
Well, Randy, I was gonna say one other comment. In regards to what we do about salaries and COLA and all this and that, as I recruit for the city, one of the biggest things to me that assists us recruiting is the benefits package. There's hardly nobody else in this community that can match us when it comes to benefits. I just gotta get people of all ages to understand the importance of benefits.
Well, and I think one thing we tried, another thing offset of that too, is we try, so we can do all our technical recruiting all day long that we talk about. From a commonsensical standpoint, the easiest way that we recruit is our employees, telling people about our work culture too. And so
Yeah.
that's another thing that we've worked on is our culture, whether it's, just overall, treatment of the staff versus career opportunities, not, avoiding glass ceilings. That doesn't get lost. We don't want to lose sight of that either, because that really helps, because we can talk about it all day long, but if an employee goes out there and tells their friend or colleague about the city, that's going to hold more weight than anything that we ever do.
That's right, yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Can we take a
Thank
brief
you.
time out,
Little stretch.
Coach?
Are you ahead? You gotta learn how
Here,
to
Mike, how are you, sir?
hold the paper water, something like that.
I did.
Yep, right. Mr. Coffey, the draft budget.
Okay, so, last budget meeting, we covered our department presentations, and so you kind of heard what all city staff were working on, what they were working toward in the next year. We've had our compensation, proposal. So Randy's compensation, recommendation, which was that 2.9% plus the step adjustment, those personnel numbers are included in this budget. So we've prepared our draft with that in mind, with the plan to adjust going forward if it is apparent that our desire from the commission is to add those personnel changes that we talked about in the last meeting and then with PD today, and then changes for some of our upcoming discussions for instance, community agencies and our shared agencies. And then lastly, we'll add in some capital. So that being said, we will get started. We're going to cover the draft operating budget for this year, and then we'll very briefly just kind of cover community agency balances, where they were last year. To put that in your mind, since our meeting next week will be the community agencies and the shared agencies other than the airports and their requests for the upcoming year. So this budget does not include funding for any shared agencies and 0 community agencies. Keep that in mind. Okay. So, in total, our general funds operating revenues are $23,330,549. This is a slight increase from previous year's budget, about $100,000 increase from the previous year's budget. When you compare to, on your large spreadsheet, when you compare to our estimated year end for 2025, it is significantly lower, where that was at 26 million. But if you remember, we utilized a portion of our ARPA funds to help offset costs related to EDA development. We also had a few odd things that happened in fiscal 25, where we had a pretty large insurance claim that increases your revenue. And then we had a couple grants that we may not necessarily receive in the upcoming year as well. So true operating cost has increased in revenue about $100,000. We have property taxes at 2.5 million. License and fees, which include your occupational license tax, your net profit tax, your insurance premium tax, and your alcohol revenue at 18.7 million. Penalties and forfeits, a very minor category, $9,000. Your service revenue, which includes contracts with various other entities within the county, Boyle County, the city of Perryville, Junction City, for things like 911 service. It includes your interfund charges from the stormwater and utility fund, totaling $870,000. Other recurring revenue, which includes that includes your school officer fees, miscellaneous items, interest, insurance proceeds. It does include 911 fees, which we receive as the landline contributions for 911 fees, which is a very small number, and a little bit larger number of fees charged to cell phone providers for 911 service. That totals $663,000. Your intergovernmental revenue, which includes your police incentive, fire incentive, other grants that we may receive throughout the year at $540,000, for again, a total of $23,330,549. So as compared to your general fund expenses, within your departments, as you go through, you can see the individual personnel costs for each department listed out. There are contract services, there are other services that they've budgeted for. Our legislative department is budgeted at 1.8 million, finance at 1.1 million, IT at 690,000, police at 6.5 million, fire at 4.9 million, 911 at 1.6 million, code enforcement, 134,000, excuse me. Public works, public services at 2.1 million. We have a goose egg for community agencies currently. Non-departmental, which includes your transfers to other funds. So that's your support for the cemetery, your support for park and rec, your support for parking, your support for garbage at 1.8 million, and your debt service, which includes your fleet vehicles, at 2.1 million. So in total, right now, your baseline budget, what we consider a baseline budget, that includes your compensation changes and includes all of your departmental asks, barring additional staff and reclassifications, you have approximately $140,000 surplus. So in your large spreadsheets, your general fund runs pages 1 through 11. And I'll give you guys just a minute because that's a lot of big pages to flip through.
Lee, could you, I hate to bother you in the middle of that, but
No.
the, wait, never mind. Answered my own question. Thank
Okay.
you.
We'll ask it anyway.
I expect questions. I love questions.
Well, yeah, that, I was just, yeah, that would have been,
Okay. Sometimes that non-departmental number, it is a little bit, I'll talk a little bit about that one because sometimes some of the true costs of the general fund get embedded in there that some people don't realize. When we talk about budgeting to max liability for health insurance, and that is on page 10, Randy assesses each department for what their department's expected health insurance is going to be. So for instance, in the current year, my department's health insurance was expected to be, okay, can't use the computer apparently today. My department's expected insurance was budgeted at $75,000. We've spent $176,000 in health insurance for my department alone, and that was just due to primarily a employee had a medical procedure done. Necessary, important procedure, and they are doing great. So to accommodate that, we capture the anticipated level, and then we budget for that extra up to max in our non-departmental line. So when you go to that non-departmental on page 10, and you look down to line 10, 19, 10, 59, 54, we're budgeting $276,000 there. If you look at the estimated from last year, that's a negative number in your expenses, and that's because we've recouped some stop loss payments. So we recorded the actual expense in the budget that it hit, and then it gets offset in this department. You also have here approximately we'll get to Park and Rec. Everybody loves Park and Rec. We'll get there in a minute. You've got about $900,000 from the general fund to Park and Rec for the city's contribution. You have $267,000 that is a contribution to the cemetery. You have $125,000 that is a contribution to the parking fund. So each individual department, I think, is really, none of them are overblown, in my opinion. They're all fairly conservative, and mostly personnel costs, like we talked about before. But that non-departmental gets a little confusing, and So I just wanted to spend a little extra time on it. So between revenues and expenses in the general fund, I feel like we talked about revenues as a concept the last couple meetings. And I feel like you all have all been around quite a bit of time to kind of know which areas you want to, that you want to maybe think about or talk about. Is there any specific departments we want to dive into or specific revenues related to the general funds?
I do want to make the point that there is no new revenue.
There's no new revenue. We are, unless we increase a tax rate or the commission votes on a new tax stream, there's not really anything we can do other than just consider where the market is, where the economy is, and what our history is, and adjust accordingly.
What, the surplus, I guess, we have 140,000, right?
$140,197.
Do you know what it was last year by any chance?
By the time we finished, it was zero.
Okay.
Yeah. By the time when we started around the same time of year, I think it may have been a little bit higher. But we end up narrowing that down when we add in community agencies and when we add in shared agencies, and then to accommodate those and any potential staffing changes, we will have to trim what other folks have requested departmentally, because I think Earl and I agree that we've kind of budgeted unconservatively in revenue from the get-go, and there's not a lot that we would feel comfortable increasing in our revenue estimates.
Yeah, when you remember last year, we talked about, we had been conservative for like 3 years in a row, pretty conservative on revenue projections to make us align our expenses more closely with, some of the concern with the economy that from post-COVID and that kind of thing. And the budget in '24, when we were doing that estimate, we narrowed, or we decreased that conservative nature a little bit like we talked about. And then last year, we did that another step. And so I don't know, so if you go to the revenue slide on your spreadsheets, you can evaluate that yourself if you want. The first column is what we are projecting revenue to be in the budget year. So it says 2025, 26 requested budget. That column is Lee and I, she goes through it, I go through it, she goes through it again, I look at her work. We go back and forth on what that projection is. The only nuance we have this year is we don't have a strong external resource. We had been working with folks out of Cincinnati on just the nature of those numbers a little bit. But given the state of overall state and the transition of the economy right now, I don't know that I don't want to necessarily rely on others' view on the economy, because I don't know that it's stable per se, like in terms, it's not necessarily predictable, set like that. It's not, there's things that can change that outlook pretty quick for us. I mean, if you've been watching the stock market alone over the last 2 weeks, you've seen that, right? And that's fine, that's okay, but we just don't want to be, liberal with the projection. So we do want to be on the conservative side of whatever we do with revenue. And so it's always been, over the last few years, to what magnitude are we being conservative? We decreased that magnitude of conservative projections. And so we're down to the point where Lee and I, this is kind of where we feel we need to land. And it is at our operating budget. We have a little bit of a surplus based on the original department requests and the payroll that we've are recommended to you. So we know we can we can back into with the expenses, we can probably get to a balanced budget as we go forward from this number, I feel like. Without being inappropriately unconservative with your revenue projection. Not necessarily inappropriate, that's even not a good word, but, so for example, the net profits estimated year end is going to be $2.568 million. That's what we estimate the net profits to be. So Leah and I are comfortable, based on historical trend, of our annual actual end of years with the economy, we're saying we don't want to estimate that higher than 2.3 million, right? You all may feel differently, but that's where Lee and I landed. So our recommendation to you is based what our collective recommendation is on revenue. So as you go down through there, estimated year end, and then, so when you're looking at that particular sheet of revenue, has all of it in the general fund, you can go back and look at annual actual 24, annual actual 23, annual actual 22, and see where she and I may have, what is leading us to conclude some of the conclusions that we're reaching in our recommendation. And see if we're too one way or another. And certainly we welcome that feedback and seek it out. But insurance premium, for example, I'm comfortable saying what we're saying there. So this year, at the end of the year, it appears that we're going to have $3,007,310 in revenue and insurance premium taxes. So we're saying keep those flat. We didn't recommend any changes. Of course, we reduced it cycle before last down to 8% again. Your health insurance rate there is still 0. And so, but in the market, we've seen premiums go up. I know they have at my house, they have at others. And so because of that increase in premium rates across the board, we feel like that's going to come in at that number next year. We don't see that number declining, right? So we project that number to be $3 million. So that you can tell from that number alone, that's not a conservative reaction. That's what we think the market, that is our fair assessment of what we think the market will do. And so we've carried that philosophy through all of it, Now on the expenses, like I said, the biggest chunk is the personnel. We do have a surplus when you balance those two against each other. So now then, getting into community agencies, getting into those joint funded things or those initiatives like economic development or whatever you choose, then we will work with that $140,000 number and work with the other expenses and try to create the ultimate solution, which is a balanced budget, but create the solution within these parameters. I think we can get there.
But the expense numbers do include, like, the interdepartmental airport.
So it does not yet include that because
All right.
officially, the airport board, that was your first hearing of what they've requested, which
Okay,
is an increase. So for last year, they requested 50,000, 56,000, or that was what they were approved for, versus 100,000 today.
Okay,
So this does not include that, and it's we can't really create, we can't build that in without knowing what they're asking, and then also knowing how you all discuss that and what until we have a recommendation for that.
So we've got to have that spreadsheet that's got all the community agencies in there, because ultimately, every one of those, you all could just say 0. right? Well, you're done then. So I anticipate some dialogue and some navigating those waters with all those agencies. And so we'll have that spreadsheet up like we normally do, and you all go through that, and then there will be a number that we will need to add to the budget to cover that, right? And then what I'm suggesting is with this $140,000 cushion right now, I think we can get to a point where we're balanced based on where we were at last year with all those agencies, right?
Okay, yeah, I see.
I think we're on the same page. We talked one time about coming up with a number that we'd give community agencies, and we don't exceed that number. So,
I mean, you all could certainly do that. That's a decision you all can absolutely make. That would make my budgeting life significantly easier. That's just something you all would have to agree
yeah,
to.
if you remember, commissioners, it's like, let's just take the 140,000. This is all we're gonna give, and here's 10 agencies. Let's figure out how we get to that 140,000.
Yeah. Last year, I believe your total for operational support, do you want me to just go to that slide?
Yeah. keep
Okay,
going.
we'll skip there. Last year, to community agencies, you provided $187,250, but that did include a capital contribution for your senior center. You had around 17 agencies. You had actually 17 agencies that you provided funding for. The high is your senior center at $73,000. That was just their operational support. You provided an additional $50,000 to them in non-capital or in capital contributions. Your low agencies was your Bluegrass Community Action and West T Hill Theater. You gave $500 to both of them. And then you have your shared agencies of the Airport Board, the Development Corporation, Planning and Zoning, the EDA, in total for $377,406. However, there's an asterisk with those numbers, $75,000, while it was allocated for economic development initiatives, that had to be a project-specific basis that the EDC could bring to the commission and get separate approval for. To date, they have not brought an initiative forward, and so they have just received, I believe we are about to spend the last $25,000 of their $100,000 operating support for the year. The planning and zoning, $100,000 also has an asterisk. 25,000 of that 100 is passed through to planning and zoning for the Architectural Heritage Board for their annual costs, where we moved their, where the DHAB is a City of Danville board, but we moved their operations under planning and zoning for realignment, so we passed those costs along. So 75,000 to planning and zoning for operations. And then for operations, 50,000 to the EDA. They separately had a contribution of 1.6 million for land acquisition, but that is a separate discussion. This is more along the lines of operational support. So keep in mind, as you're thinking about these general fund numbers, if you want to maintain the same level of support across all of the community agencies and the shared agencies, that 141,000, gets stretched in there, and then we start pulling back. Okay, well, maybe the furniture that I've budgeted this year, maybe I go another year and we put that off, or maybe something in Josh, I'll pick on him since he's in the audience, maybe something that he said, oh, we'll do this in Public Works, or we'll hold off another year, so. At our next meeting, you'll hear the community agencies present their requests and what they're planning to do with the funds in the upcoming year. And then the meeting after that, I think between the next meeting and the meeting after, you all will get the opportunity to present what you desire for contributions to these agencies. And then we'll provide a recommendation based on your all's feedback and move forward from that point.
So none of the shared agencies are included in this
None of them
baseline,
are
right?
included.
Okay.
So this is just strictly your compensation increase plus your department budget created by your departments. We have not adjusted those yet.
That was the same approach we took last year as well.
I was just doing some numbers in my head, that
Yeah.
147 goes away pretty fast.
It
140.
does.
Okay. That's the reality, so.
So we will squeak right along and if you do think of a question about the general fund or other funds as we're going along, let me know. We can either come back to it or maybe something I can answer then. We will move on to Park and Rec. Page 17 of your spreadsheets is the Park and Rec revenue. Total revenue for operations for Park and Recreation is budgeted at $1,766,966. $900,000 of that is contributions from the general fund. $86,000 is service revenue, which includes your rent for various buildings, including Jenny Rogers. You have parks revenue at $325,000. You have other recurring revenue, which includes some concessions at Jenny Rogers, interest, miscellaneous items at $14,950, sponsorships at $50,000, and your contribution from the Boyle County Fiscal Court at $390,413. That rate is adjusted by COLA each year, which is set in the agreement between the city and the county. Within your expenses for Park and Rec, you have several different departments. You have debt service, which is the fleet vehicles used at Park and Rec, at $12,000. Millennium Park is by far your biggest budget for the park system at $945,000. Your fitness center is $416,000. Your pool is $109,000. Community parks are at $45,000, and Jenny Rogers is at $237,000. The way we craft the operating budget for Park and Rec, we don't have a surplus or a deficit because the general fund is kind of helping to cover the difference between its own generated revenue and the contribution from the fiscal court. We only provide enough revenue to cover all the necessary expenses. Park and Rec as a fund hasn't been around long enough to develop, to build up its fund balance that some of the other funds have to spend it down. In future years, you may see a smaller general fund contribution if there's a sufficient fund balance to kind of pick up any additional cost. So you have a net negative or a net zero surplus deficit for the Park and Rec fund.
Just out of curiosity, Lee and Josh may be able to answer this. Have we taken a look at talking about a new indoor facility, Millennium Park Fitness Center pool numbers? If you added those three presently, how they would change?
So that would be a fully separate cost, right? I mean, maybe you would get rid of some of these costs or a lot of these costs if you do that.
Yep.
But from a budgeting standpoint, I can certainly do that. We haven't done that in an actual spreadsheet format. But until,
You have to refine the scope a little
Yeah.
bit more before you can really start doing a pro forma, which is what you're asking for, which is what we acknowledge we need to do. Part of it is a solution on what's in the building, the fitness center, for example, what happens if this fitness center is dealt with differently, same thing with the pool. So we've got to really do a pro forma based on the defined scope, and we're working on that as fast as we can.
Okay.
We know there's a lot of pressure on that.
so this is just what it takes for the next year.
Sure.
I would anticipate if you did have an indoor rec center with a pool, which was suggested, that we would likely get rid of the Bunny Davis pool just due to the cost to maintain it and to repair it.
Well,
as old
possibly
it is.
fitness center, and according to Tommy, personnel costs might put on too, so. But that'll come up with probably a committee you're gonna put together.
Yeah, and the budget itself would, if you all elected to do that, and you elected to generate some form of way to pay for it, that would be included, those kind of actual budgets for that, for the changes to Park and Rec, would likely be discussed in detail there. And keep in mind, this 1.7 million doesn't include any of your capital costs. This is for all of your funds. This is with no capital for the next year, which includes things like your new equipment, or if the pool does need additional repairs, or one of the facilities needs a large repair. So that's your fleet vehicles for the Park Service. So they have, I believe, 2 or 3 trucks, something like that. They do have a car, but there's no, that's a city-owned vehicle. There's no debt service related to that. So they're in the same rotation of fleet vehicles that the rest of the city's fleet is in. They may have to, in the upcoming years, add an additional vehicle. We've talked about realigning some of those, because occasionally the city hall doesn't have enough vehicles, depending on staffing that day. So realigning some of that, but currently there's only 12,000, close to 13 at Park and Rec. We will keep moving along. We have 4 what are considered other governmental funds. That includes your municipal aid fund, your opioid fund, your highway safety fund, and your drug forfeiture fund. Municipal aid covers your streets and roads. We won't spend a ton of time on these funds, so you are backtracking in your packet, your spreadsheet a little bit to page 12. We are budgeting $356,500 in anticipated intergovernmental fund, which includes your road aid and your LGEAF mineral funds, which I can't remember the acronym for, but you have a very, very small amount of, it's essentially coal money for natural resources. You get about between $5,000 and $10,000 each year in those funds. The majority of this fund is your state road aid from your gas tax that we get, $350,000. We are budgeting $460,000, so you are seeing a little bit of that spend down of your fund balance to $97,000. $300,000 is towards your road aid. We did budget $140,000 in your operational transfer to the general fund. From this fund, there is some work that is going on with an anticipated grant fund match. that will be for Boffman Avenue. And that will be transferred back to the general fund and some design to hit that 460,000. You still have a healthy fund balance in this fund, so spending that down is it's not a concern. Your opioid fund, we talked a little bit about one of the last couple meetings. We don't have any projects planned, so at the moment that the revenue is coming in, and it's essentially kind of waiting for us to have a appropriate project or appropriate expenses. We're anticipating $55,000 in the opioid funds, zero expenses.
Lee, can we give that to another party, like?
We absolutely can.
Like
if-
ASAP? I mean,
It has to be specified for opioid abatement. And they have to meet certain criteria,
Okay.
but we absolutely can give that to other parties. A lot of cities do that.
is there something I can give them to look at or fill out or see if we qualify?
So if they have their, internally, if they do 5 things, if one of those is opioid abatement, when they're doing their presentation, they should point out how much of their allocation would be dedicated specific for that purpose. And so if they do 5 things and have got a $50,000 budget, that's $10,000 each. And so one of the things they might want to do is allocate more of their effort, more of their request of the city towards the opioid aspect of what they do, right?
Gotcha.
And if they're in the business of things related to opioid, if that's something they're working on routinely, they're probably aware of the opioid requirements. We don't have anything offhand. There's some laws and resources out there. For the city's purposes, compared to a regular agency allocation, they would have to, at the end, once you approve some of their allocations, they're gonna have to fill out some more paperwork. They're gonna have to agree to share possibly a little bit more information than they have based on the law, because we, as the recipient of these funds, have to be able to determine that the funds were spent on opioid remediation and not on the additional impacts of opioid use. And so we can absolutely give it to other folks. I think that's a great,
It's a good way to pull
Use.
them out of competitive positions with community agencies in general. You know, if that's a specific source of dollars dedicated for a specific purpose, if that's their purpose, then maybe we can treat them over into a different category. And that's certainly reasonable to do it that way.
I'll probably have Kathy get in touch with one or both of them.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Get to see what to do. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Highway.
We do, let me interrupt, we do want to talk to the chief about that, though, too.
Okay.
To make sure that the police aren't being guided towards ideas that will also compete
Oh,
with
yeah.
the money.
I
Yeah.
get that.
Highway safety is your highway safety grant from the state. There is, it's a deficit of revenue versus expense in the current year. There is a fund balance to accommodate that. Some of it is a little bit timing based on when we receive the reimbursement from the grant. In the last several years, we haven't quite hit the max grant amount we've been approved for, say, 15 to 20,000 to receive that. And we've been closer to the 6.5–7% or 7,000 mark. So we're budgeting for $6 million in grant receipts and 14,000 in highway safety expenses. That may go up this year now that we do have that, I forget the officer's name, that does a lot of highway safety activity. Your drug forfeiture is strictly on receipts from drug forfeits. That comes in through our circuit court. We're budgeting $7,550, and we're budgeting $7,500 in expenses, a $50 surplus. The use of these funds is significantly restricted to drug forfeiture-related activity. Typically, we pay for a software with those funds, which is eligible, which runs right around $7,000. Minimal activity in these funds other than municipal aid, but that's kind of a standard operations. So those were your governmental funds.
Let's say this about municipal aid. That is a growing problem in Kentucky. There's a lot of discussion about what happens with that revenue, the split. I know KLC and KCO both had opinions on how to handle that and recommendations with the state. That revenue is highly dependent on what happens in Frankfurt. From a state's perspective, I could argue as an engineer that probably if the state should allocate 100% of some of those monies towards resurfacing and pure maintenance, not construction. That's hard for some of our state representatives to agree to, right? There's a lot of that dialogue that we're gonna have to have as a state because, you can, the increased traffic volume on our roads, regardless of source, whether it be trucks, cars using gas, cars using electric, the impact on our pavement surfaces is getting worse. And so that money alone is not enough to cover the maintenance expense, truthfully. And so like, for example, Corporate Drive, what was your number to pay for just Corporate Drive? Do you remember off the top of your head? Just round number. Yeah, it was like $350,000 just to pay Corporate Drive. Well, that's the entire revenue for the year for a city like Danville, right? And so we did seek a grant for that this year, didn't get it, but we'll continue to pursue those opportunities when they exist. But the maintenance on our streets and roads is a significant issue for the state, so that when you're talking to your state rep, it might be worthwhile to encourage them to participate in the dialogue that I know there's, KBT's talked about it a lot, KLC's talked about it a lot, KCO's talked about it a lot. Continue to engage and not give up in those conversations to try to resolve how you do maintenance versus how you do construction.
What part of the issue is they recalculated the formula for how they hand out the money or something?
No, well, I mean, it's an age-old problem. I mean, the gas tax is it is a user fee. And user fees typically are only capable of recovering operating expenses. You can't necessarily recover capital construction expenses through direct user fees. And so there's some discussion to be had of whether or not the gas tax should go towards maintenance, which is things like resurfacing and flood, ditch control, roadway drainage, some of those basic maintenance issues. And then maybe the capital has to come from the general fund, I don't know that. I mean, and I'm not advocating for any necessary position other than I want to advocate and acknowledge that gas tax issue, that revenue from municipal aid is not necessarily sustainable when you're looking at the impact on our roads of the volume of traffic we have now. And so that's evidence, even through downtown on the state roads that you see. I know through Center is a problem because you have some under pavement drainage issues, that always decay some of those spots. And if you've driven through there, there's 5 different streets that we can name where we see that on a regular basis. The city has ours, so that's a broader discussion, not necessarily tied to our budget, but is something that we would suggest you all consider weighing in on as you do have those opportunities. And we can spend more time talking about it in the future if you want to come by sometime, and we can sit down and just look how broad reaching the problem is. And so I don't envy the state in trying to figure out, Representative Elliott and Senator Bledsoe are, that's a complicated thing for those folks to have to manage. And certainly we respect their talking about it as they do. We know they do, we're aware that they do. And so we appreciate their consideration on all those issues. Those are challenging.
And you can see that in our budget. In 2020, we received $322,000, and this year we're anticipating 366.
Okay.
You know, inflation, and
I guess
that's
it was
not
just me.
changed
I got the
substantially
impression
since.
that Josh was
Yeah,
surprised at the number, but not really.
no.
The cost of
me.
paving, you know, has, you know, we are, when you mill a street, if you're dealing with a curb and gutter street, you need to mill it. Well, that's doubles the expense versus the first year we resurfaced where you didn't mill. Well, now that you've resurfaced once, in order to maintain roadway drainage, you need to mill it. So that adds cost to maintenance, plus just your unit cost per ton of asphalt in place has gone up dramatically over the last 15 years. It is what it is. So you have to react to that, and I don't envy this state for trying to reconcile it, because it is a challenge to figure out how you maintain the transportation system. And we try to be proactive, engage in those conversations directly. We try to represent the city's interest in a lot of those meetings. We've done it for 20 years. We continue to be involved with KBT and some of those other organizations because it's necessary for us to have a voice in those conversations because we're impacted by them, so.
So your cemetery fund, page 22 of your spreadsheets, we are anticipating, we're budgeting $404,199 in revenues, $404,199 in expenses. Your primary source of revenue right now from the cemetery fund is a transfer from your general fund of $267,000. You have operating fees, which include your cemetery lot sales and cemetery job work, which is the cost of burial and interment of $130,000 and $6,500 in miscellaneous other interest, things like that. Your costs are broke down for the cemetery fund. Personnel at $209,000. Contract services, $172,000, where we were talking about personnel costs earlier versus the total fund budget. This fund also has a very large contract for mowing, which is seen there in that $172,000. Other items necessary for operations, $20,000. You have debt service in this fund as well, but that is also fleet vehicles of $2,126. Josh has been in discussions with the cemetery board about fees charged by the cemetery for things like cremation, burials, for costs on holidays and weekends that we haven't changed in quite some time. And I believe in the near future, he will be bringing a proposal about some changes to the commission. We don't budget based on what Josh is going to do in the future. We budget based on what is actually currently true. So you could see less of a general fund transfer if we increase that revenue and the cost that it takes that we receive for the services we provide. That's just my little, nudge Josh in the side while he's here, and he takes it very well.
He's pretending to ignore you.
Cemetery's pretty simple fund. Stormwater, as Josh talked about in his department presentation, we are looking to introduce a rate increase to the stormwater funds in the upcoming fiscal year. We did budget for that since he's got that prepared for you all in the new fiscal year, raising the rate from 3.36 to 3.75. That'll be the first rate increase since the inception of the stormwater fee for revenues of $713,865. $706,000 of that is the fee assessed to stormwater customers. Your operating expenses for the stormwater funds, primarily personnel at $634,000, contract services at $51,000, other items at $54,000. You do have debt service within the stormwater fund of $49,000. That does include some fleet vehicles of $1,118. The primary, you had a stormwater bond issuance related item from several years back. Your annual debt service is $48,602 for a total of $789,138. So you do have a anticipated operating deficit in the current year. You will pay for that deficit with your fund balance from the stormwater fund, which is about, which has risen over the last few years. I'm sorry, it's decreased over the last few years due to, we've increased the costs related to stormwater. You hired a stormwater coordinator. Costs have just increased inflationary wise, and you haven't had that rate increase previously. So I think it is appropriate to use that operating deficit with your, to pay for it with your fund balance in the current year.
How long have we had the stormwater utility?
She's been here about a year, right?
No, I mean, when did we start the stormwater utility?
Oh,
work of-
2008,
We haven't raised it in however many years.
15, 16 years. Josh and I did some quick math. If we had raised it based on the COLA each year, like we do with utilities, it would be over $5. So I think that's a reasonable jump. Okay, the utility fund. Total utility fund revenues, which that is on page 26 of your spreadsheet, is at $12,792,790. This does include an anticipated COLA adjustment to rates, which we do annually. Like we had mentioned with compensation, COLA is 2.9% this year. Fees associated with water will generate $6,311,000, not $11,000. Sewer-related charges will be $6,272,000. Other is about $208,000 for your total of $12.7 million. Total cost anticipated for your operating expenses for the utility fund is $12,661,691. So right now, Marshall has budgeted a $131,000 surplus in the utility fund. That includes $1.4 million for your utility administration, $3 million for your water treatment plant, $1.4 million for your water distribution, $1.8 million for your wastewater treatment plant, $985,000 for your sewer rehab and collection, $257,000 for Paravel. You also have some non-departmental charges in your utility fund of $916,000 and debt service of $2,715,000.
Big strain on this long-term is, of course, managing your infrastructure, managing the expenses tied to maintenance and upgrade, particularly capacity upgrade on the sewer issues as they arise, the I&I, the working through those. Maintenance and long-term reliability are always a problem. We've got our plants in a solid position, reliability wise. The systems, the distribution system, Marshall's got a real heavy lift in terms of just managing the small ARPA-funded projects that are ongoing, cleaning those up, there's money allocated for those. But as you transition away from the ARPA funds into more of our normal capital program, the next phase of that capital program isn't funded yet. And and typically you would debt service the utility work to capture the benefit with the rates paid. So user in year 10, you want them paying the debt service for that infrastructure they're using. So typically you would see a lot of debt on the utility side. And so then saying that, the utility fund's very healthy. It has been for a long time. But since the 2017 rate changes and, you know, we've been able to manage the impact of COVID and all those things. And when I say it's been healthy for a long time, you know, that's relative terms to COVID and that kind of thing. I'm not talking about beyond that. But that's with staff. Marshall's done a great job in organizing his thoughts on how they spend money. The individual department heads underneath him have done a terrific job with reacting to expenses and reacting to maintenance to get us to a point where this is a solid surplus operating wise. Granted, on the sewer side, you're required to break even. You got to remember that. And then, so saying that, then this is the cycle where we ask Salt River to come in and look at our rate structure, our rate base again, make sure our base allocation is still correct, make sure that we go through that iteration with new customer, Washington County's purchasing water. North Mercer is consuming some water on the west end now consistently. So now that the Perryville Road project's done, you're seeing really what the impact of that is on a revenue side, but also on the expense side at the plant to get them water, right? So we'll see the balance of that this year. So it is the correct year to get your updated rate study. So we're working on that this year. Hopefully we'll get through that in the fall before we get into the January time period, so that again, this is the time of year where you want to do those things, those types of things. And so Marshall's correctly engaging in activity now. Meanwhile, he's working on all the other capital, and again, the department heads are doing a great job. Marshall's still trying to consider, if you'll remember back to his department presentation, what to do with the management structure of the system, given some of the turnover that's existing, given some of the turnover that he can anticipate in the future. So we'll continue to talk about what is the new, or what is the structure that best fits his employees that he has now and the workload he has now. Remember, we had that little bit of that conversation. We created the program manager position to handle lead and copper and some of those other complex things. And so then we want to do another iteration of that transition. We've done, 3 now with utility admin. Creating that department was a very healthy thing for the utility operation for the customer. We want to refine that, continue to improve those functions for the customer, provide better customer service. Those are points of emphasis that we continue to have. Melanie's done just a terrific job with ideas on the website. And so as we continue to refine that, the information flow will hopefully continue to improve out from the utility. But that's a complex thing. I think Marshall and overall the team there is doing a great job. Definitely improved over the last 5 years with some of the changes we've made. And so we'll continue to look to do that. But the rate study will be forthcoming. Put that on in the back of your mind so that when you see it, you're prepared to react to it. So it's not a surprise for you. But that's the biggest thing that in the short term that we see coming out of the utility is doing the confirming rate study to also give us some direction on how we absorb future capital construction, because you do not necessarily build a reserve on the capital side for the utility fund and then just go do a project. You correctly debt service that so that the future user who's getting the benefits paying the expense. Yeah. Yeah, we need that. That's funny, Kevin, because you a lot of times that's not not, when you're talking about debt service, there's always, but previous commissions verbalized that, you know, and communicate, begin that communication outward, you know, in that 2005 era, 2004 era, when we really started talking about the new water plant. And once you talk about that, what you just said, a lot of people don't understand it till they hear it. And then once you talk to them about it for 5 minutes, they're like, well, that's correct. I mean, that's actually correct. And so we just pass that along.
So we will move on to your parking fund. That is page 35 of your spreadsheet. Total revenues for the parking fund are budgeted at $453,100. Total expenses at $450,591 with a very minor surplus of $2,500. We are budgeting a transfer from the general fund of $125,000. We are anticipating penalties and forfeits of $7,000. That includes parking tickets, essentially, of $7,000, and operating fees of $321,000. That includes your leased parking spaces in the garage, which are budgeted at $300,000. That includes your leased spaces in both parking lots of $12,000, some general interest, and that includes your daily rates for use at the parking garage, although we have, despite us increasing the 2-hour free parking, we've not moved away from that. We've really not seen a huge drop in the daily rate usage, so you still have a lot of people that are coming in and staying for longer than 2 hours that are using the parking garage. The parking garage stays leased completely. Occasionally, we will have someone that relinquishes their lease when their short-term lease is up, and we have a waiting list for the parking garage. Second and Third Street stay fairly full. I believe there are a couple of spaces available, which we post on our website, in Second Street, Third Street. I think we have maybe 2 or 3 available in Third Street. We do adjust the parking garage rates annually. The Second and Third Street rates haven't been adjusted. Just conversationally, Tony and Josh and Earl and all of us have discussed kind of parking strategy for downtown. Do we want to bring a request to increase those rates to the commission? Do we want to change the strategy of how we do parking? That's a long-term decision beyond just raising the rates in those lots. The parking garage is where you do receive the majority of your revenue for the general fund. Expenses, your operating expenses, personnel is very small in this fund compared to some of the other funds, but you have one employee that is assigned to this fund. $71,000 for total personnel cost. Contract services at $102,000. Other items at $5,100. You have debt service for the building of the parking garage of $272,000. It was either it was somewhere 25 or 30 years. I believe it is, I don't have it offhand we issued it in, I believe, somewhere between right around 2006, 2008. I believe it's 2008 when the actual debt service, the bond was issued. You may have received the funds several years before that. And so if that was a 30-year, you're looking at 2038 until it's paid off. I believe it was a couple of the issuances were refinanced in previous years to take advantage of interest rates, but that did not extend your debt service timeline. There was a newer issuance, now that I'm thinking about the energy efficiency project that the city did back in 2017. So that one may have a little bit longer of a life on it, but all things considered, comparatively, while it is in that 272,000, there is a portion of that that is for the parking garage. But I believe it's around 16,000 annually. And that was a 2017 issuance, so you're looking at 20 to 30 years on that. So with the rate adjustments that we've done over the last couple of years, it almost is, right? Once you get to that 100 and, I mean, if you have to have a parking enforcement personnel, you have to have costs associated with that. There's, some of the contract services are related to just maintenance and repair of the building, the security services that we have contracted each year. So I think in a couple years, so essentially we did not adjust the rates with COLA for many years, and that was just under previous administrations. That was just something they did not do. That was prior to my tenure, and I believe Earl's tenure as the city manager, so I don't know that we can speak to why they chose not to. But within the leases for the parking garage, there is a clause that we increase the rate of the leases based on the CPI at a certain point in the lease term for those long-term rates. And we did that last fiscal year, I believe. Yeah, because when you look at the budget for 2024 at 230,000, you see a pretty significant jump to 2025 of 275,000, where you have been pretty stable at 230,000 for many years. And we did that, it was a big increase for a lot of entities right up front, when we maybe should have started adjusting it back in 2018 or so. There was a little bit of pain on some of our folks, probably some of our entities. And we did have conversations with them where we said, you know, we can't speak to why that they didn't do it before. This is in your lease, and consider yourself lucky that we didn't do it before. So those current rates, though, are scheduled to increase each year based on inflation and cost of living factors. So I think within a couple more years, that 125 that the general fund provides as support is going to significantly decrease. So, you just have two more. Your garbage fund, your museum fund. Your garbage fund, we talked about quite a bit at the department presentation. Your anticipated $1,602,348 in operating fees and revenue. Your expenses are budgeted at $1,688,193. That is a deficit, and we have had a deficit in the last couple years. And Josh spent quite a bit of time talking about that fund at the last meeting. So unless you all have questions, I won't go too far into that. That does include $45,000 to the fiscal court for the recycling service in the city. That's a contract that we have it's a 10-year contract. I think we're on about year 4-ish of that, or not contract agreement. The museum fund, we are budgeting $57,500 in operating revenues. That's a minor amount of interest. The majority is a contribution from the general fund. We are budgeting $72,800 and $983 in operating expenses. If you all remember from a few meetings ago, the Art Center requested a contribution to help fund the utilities at the 409 Main Street property, which is in their lease, that they can request that. So we've increased the normal approximately $50,000 to $55,000 in operating expenses to accommodate that anticipated change. That deficit will be spent down from the fund balance in the museum fund, which is sufficient to support that in the current year. So we've discussed community agencies a little bit already. We can go back if necessary, but that's kind of all the numbers in a, good hour, 45 minutes. So is there any areas that you guys want me to go back to?
We talked so much about the new structure or whatever at the pool and all the big athletic complex.
That's going to be, that's going to be no matter what you do, you're going to have to debt service $5 million.
Right.
That's a $500,000 debt service. You got to figure that out.
Right.
And so
Debt
there's a lot of work to do there, because then not only you got to come up with $500,000, if you own it, you got to operate it.
Sure, yeah.
Unless you can come up with a different way with partnerships through shared agencies to pay for that, which, we need to fully vet those things. And then you got the restaurant tax issue that's still floating around. We had some good conversations with some other cities yesterday on our trip to Louisville. When we went to Louisville, city attorney and I was with them talking about the administration of those, again, those communities that have those facilities that the public generally is asking for. They all have the restaurant tax.
Yeah.
But it was interesting yesterday, we were able to get into a conversation with a community that had been dealing with the administration of it since they did not have the tax. They passed the tax in like 2016 with a stated purpose, which is what you would do when you want to pass it. I mean, you got to have a reason for it. And how they, what their position was, well, we did it this way, probably wasn't right. We need to change it and go back and administer it this way. And so we got to hear that firsthand. And certainly when we talk about that in the future, it'll be coming with some context, with some do's and don'ts, and what did we do right, what did we do wrong. Those are important conversations, and we're trying to have those just to see, what others say. And so that's been good. But that's a big discussion.
Yeah.
Not only is building something like that a big discussion, but funding it is equally a big discussion. But making sure that your quality of life features that contribute to economic vitality are where they need to be comparison to other people, that's important. And that's a big discussion too.
Yeah. People are real excited about, well, a lot of people are really excited about us having such a place, and I just wanted to let them know sort of that we're still working in that direction, I guess.
Yeah, it requires some additional legwork on our part to build the pro forma, what it would look like. It requires us to have those partnership conversations. It requires us to continue to develop what the scope would be, and that means space utilization. How big do you build a room? That's what's the occupancy of that? What does the occupancy need to be? Then you can back into it based on code. And so all those things are what we have to get through in order before we can really talk about the next phase. The next, as terms of building that, you all do need to do a site visit. We need to coordinate that so that you can see facilities that what they offer. And so that when we talk about, do you want to offer this? And if you say no, then that's square footage we don't need, that type of analysis. So we do need to, and we don't just need, we want to have that conversation with you guys. And so therefore, we've got to figure out a way to get you on some of those site visits. The budget process takes a lot of time, so that probably realistically won't happen before June. But we do want to get June and July. We do want to go to a couple of those visits as our budget calendar allows us to do that.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Is that fair, Josh, on the facilities, Bethel?
You said debt service $5 million, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's
That would be
realistic.
a small
That-
facility.
I mean, that's the minimum, you know, that kind of thing, like the bare minimum.
So that means you either find an additional revenue source or you cut $500,000 a year
From somewhere.
from somewhere,
Right.
which is, I
That's a
mean, we're
chunk.
gonna
That's real money.
adjust for, our community agencies and shared agencies, and potential changes to staffing levels, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We're struggling to stretch that 141,000, so that would be in addition,
Yeah.
additional 500, or more, depending on how large your facility is.
And any tax increases or revenues we talk about, getting close to a number like that is almost impossible, isn't it?
Without a new source, in my opinion, yes, for the current level we have. Now, if you want to wipe a department off the map, I wouldn't suggest that. You
No more
might, you
water for
might do
you.
it, but that would be that's the cost that you're talking about.
I agree.
So
yeah.
you would have to, in my opinion, you would have to bring in a new stream of revenue.
Yes. And the restaurant tax might be that revenue stream, but it might not generate that kind of support.
Based on I had an intern do some work for me last semester. He did a fantastic job. And just looking strictly at the data we have from restaurants that sell alcohol, we would generate an additional $900,000 a year in revenue. That doesn't include your McDonald's, your Wendy's, your fast food joints, Chick-fil-A. And Harrodsburg, anecdotally, their tourism restaurant tax brought in $800,000 in 2023, fiscal year '23. And Harrodsburg has significantly less restaurants than we
Right.
do. So there is potential, a good revenue stream in restaurant tax. But like we had talked about, there are potential legal challenges to that. There's,
Was that at 3% that you're in?
that was 3%. We looked at what it would be for 1%, 2%, and 3%. At 3% from just our alcohol selling restaurants, that would be $900,000 at 3%. So, I don't know how much in sales McDonald's does a year.
They do about Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A, it cost me $20 for a chicken sandwich and some waffle fries.
They hooked me for $14 yesterday. That's
I spend it too, so.
stupid grass growing, need to get home in a hurry, maybe.
We're happier looking at that at a minor, much minor income note. Have we adjusted fees for SROs?
Fees for what?
SROs.
Oh, so those, we do have contracts, those are individual contracts each year. We have, the KSD contract will be up for renewal. I believe that we're currently in a 2-year term for that one. I believe when we passed the DCA contract, that was a tiered rate that's supposed to increase in the upcoming year. I'll have to pull those contracts out. And I'm not sure about the Danville one off the top of my head, but we do look at each of those contracts each year, and assess the fee based on how many hours they are, at that facility.
Yeah, they almost cost us money rather than make money, though.
Well, that's also a kind of philosophical question, right? Do you want to charge do you want to generate a profit to use elsewhere on your SROs? Currently, we do not do that.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to do that.
An argument against that, it would be,
Yeah.
you've got an obligation to provide them police service.
Yes. That's
right.
It doesn't matter about the fact that you're dedicating a single officer. Some could argue that saves you money because you're more efficiently responding. You can do preventive maintenance versus reactive care. right? So, the argument has always been statewide is that our formula is not inconsistent with other formulas. It's very consistent. We treat our SROs very much the same, as other cities are doing. And the balance point there, that ratio is about what the common acceptance of difference between the enhanced service of SRO coverage versus regular police protection. I don't know if that's true or not, you know what I mean? All we can do is look at what everybody else is doing and see what we feel about it based on our numbers and staff time and things that the chief and I and Doan have talked about. And, that's kind of where we're at with it too. We kind of agree and accept that as a premise. So now what do you all want to do about it different than that? We can always have that
Yeah,
conversation.
we know we're not gonna make any money out of it, just trying to look at a smaller loss. I think the state's paying more.
State's contributing that little bit of bump.
Yep.
We're going to get the benefit of that. So your loss theoretically is not, it's not a loss. The cost to cover that is not as much general fund based. You're getting some of that cost offset more of that cost offset by the schools, now a little bit by the state. So do you try to get additional cost directly from the schools? That's a good, that's what you're asking, right? And so we should have that conversation again and make sure with our superintendents that we're being reasonable both ways and
Honestly, probably people didn't know we had SROs until the DCA thing came up, honestly.
didn't understand how those police officers were there.
And didn't understand, well, I didn't even, that, we cover that anyway. We'd be out there anyway.
Yeah. So a majority of your citizens that you provide interaction, that you interact with, in managing domestic issues, civil issues, or criminal issues tied to whatever, those people have kids. And so your intervention begins with, sometimes that can be a red flag. Sometimes we're there to more efficiently get to a criminal behavior, more efficiently get to a domestic issue. And so one of the subtle things, and I tell people this, school, for example, like DCA is private property. They have to allow you onto campus, right? In order to, so you don't want to necessarily create a safe haven accidentally against, that is more challenging to get the police to. So they have to then, if we're going to get an officer in the building, they have to permit us to do that. Well, with the SRO contract, we're already there. We're allowed to be there. So that first layer of permission is already acquired. And so then if you're doing investigations, you actually have the officer there that's going to participate in the investigation, already beginning the investigation with real-time information versus, coming in secondhand, getting information from somebody else, from a third party. You're there. And so that process saves the city money in terms of staff time, right? It is more efficient. And so if you have a criminal activity at a school, you're producing fewer man hours to do that investigation, which frees up man hours for something else somewhere else. So there's a significant benefit to having that SRO person in that building, permitted from the tip.
I think it's calmed down to some degree now, but they, just, a lot of people feel like we, from DCA anyway, that we should be made whole, that there shouldn't be we can provide it, but they need to pay for it, 100%.
Yeah, right.
So,
Right.
I don't know.
As that contract comes up,
Well,
that's
and
y'all's
you're
choice.
going to be there with Kroger. Like you're there at your shopping retail centers during high volume seasons. You're going to be there. During Black Friday, you're going to be there. But you're not recovering anything from them. So you can't be discriminate with how you collect that, and frankly, some of that feels, just because they're a private institution, it feels a little discriminatory both ways. And so you got to be careful not to engage in that political side of that when it comes to policing, because we have to be indiscriminate with that. You know, so what is the difference between a commercial enterprise and that semi-commercial enterprise? Both of them can be perceived as paying the same occupational taxes. They both pay occupational taxes. They both contribute a significant number. The city's revenue, you got $2.5 million come from property taxes. So the fact that the school doesn't pay property taxes doesn't necessarily mean they aren't contributing a lion's share towards operations of the city, meaning they still pay occupational taxes, and the disproportionate share of our occupational taxes come from education and medical, right? So our two biggest contributors to occupational taxes are those two combined. More than 50% of your net profit or your occupational taxes come from those two sources. So for those that say, well, DCA doesn't pay anything in taxes, that's just not true. That is just factually not true. And do they pay more than a regular business? Some say yes. And so when you get into the number of people they employ versus the number of people who employ a small commercial shop, they pay a greater share typically through occupational taxes. So that is a very complicated issue. And when it comes to law enforcement, though, we do try to avoid the context of it being a political discussion, because we're going to be there no matter, we are obligated to provide police protection no matter what their affiliation, right? There's a balance to that, and I understand it's a challenge, but understand that's where the police start from. And so we certainly take direction from you, obviously, but that's what we've always tried to communicate, to try to balance the conversation so that you aren't overwhelmed with X, Y, or Z. Right.
Well, and the only reason I bring it up is because it's still being brought up, and it may come up when the contract's up again, or, you know,
Right.
just.
And we'll try to make sure that we're having a conversation, just to have that conversation. We'll try to make sure that we evaluate that program fully before that comes up next time, right? And, you know, just to try to make that more, when I say have the conversations across the program with all of our SRO contracts, we want to look at our baseline contract to make sure we're treating everybody fairly, that we're at a recovery point that you are comfortable with, if that makes sense.
The SROs in our schools, based on the numbers that the chief presented to us this morning, they're included in that second level down there? They're not are they a part of the 39 he was referring to?
No, they're above that.
They're above that, right?
Right.
Okay, so if they're in the, say, 5 schools, 6, 7 schools, if there was a major incident any place in town, and the chief said, get out of the schools and come help us, to me, it's more manpower.
So when it is, and that's one of the things we've talked about. So it's if you're having a major situation at a school, you've already got somebody there to
Sure, that's
respond,
right.
the
Yeah.
purpose of it.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, if you're having to lock down the school because of something somewhere else,
Yeah.
and that something somewhere else is, frees up the availability of that SRO to aid in response during the day.
Yes.
100%, that's an asset that is a sleeping asset for us in response.
Yeah, what if it was at Center, not at one of our one of our,
All right, which is totally possible,
they'd go to Center then.
right? They'd go to center, worst case.
And other than, I believe, 2 of the SROs, they are considered, they don't work a full year, they
Sure,
work the
that's
school
right, yeah.
year.
All right.
Yeah.
And so that is, that is also a consideration.
Yeah. Then I guess, I don't, wouldn't put to discuss it, but I guess we need to look at, the sheriff's department was providing SROs to all the county schools and to DCA. I don't know what the cost factor was made ours look so different, but I think that's part of the discussion too. People were okay with the sheriff's department providing it, but not the police department. I don't know what the cost factor was, what the difference in the cost factor was, but
I'm not sure what they charged.
yeah, my thing was, I just was forgot about the money, forgot about the difference in the schools, there's 400 kids out there. And a certain number of adults. And that 9 to 5 protection is there, 9 to 5, so. Yeah. Well, we'll have to talk about it again, I'm sure. But that's not on our agenda. Oh, it is,
Yeah,
I guess that's a
no.
budgetary item, yeah, it is, it's a budgetary item.
I guess it's a revenue.
Everything's discussable at a budget meeting, because it's
Yeah, it's a
all,
budget item,
it
isn't
all
it?
impacts your
That's right,
budget.
yeah. And, okay, any other questions or comments? We've been here for a good little while. Is that 1 o'clock or 12 o'clock?
12 o'clock.
12 o'clock.
Any other questions or comments? Anything else you all have for us?
That's it.
Appreciate y'all very
You
much.
back there has something for us? Got some signs and things for you or something, don't you? Oh, okay, all right. Well, then I guess we can entertain a motion to adjourn then, right? Thanks, staff, for all the information we've.
I move to
received.
adjourn.
Thank you, sir. You second? Thank you, sir. In the absence of Holland and Peak, we'll say we had a very informed.